Bridget Boland was born in 1969 in Ballyveldy in Tipperary County in Southern Ireland. She was the youngest daughter of a couple, Patrick Boland and Bridget Keating, who had 3 other children besides her. Bridget's parents were local farm workers. They always worked hard so that their children had a good life and the means to support themselves when they were older. The village Bridget lived in was quite small. It had only 9 houses and an estimated population of 31 people. Bridget, being the youngest and the only daughter in the family, was not needed for the land work, so she could study while her brothers helped her parents. She studied at a school that belonged to a Catholic convent. There, she was literate, catechized, and took embroidery and sewing classes. Around 1986, Bridget moved to Clonmel to specialize in sewing and have a skilled trade. Clonmel was the county's capital and was one of the largest cities in Ireland at the time, with over 10,000 inhabitants. Bridget was a woman of medium height, blue eyes, white skin, and brown hair. She stood out for her beauty and also for the job she exercised. She was considered stylish and independent, and few women shared the same reality as her, since most at the time did not have access to the means and education she had. Despite being coveted by many men because of her beauty, no one expected her to fall in love with Michael Cleary, a man 9 years older than her and with hardly any looks. Michael was a successful cooper. He manufactured wine barrels for several local companies. They met in the town of Clonmel shortly after Bridget moved there to specialize in sewing. In August 1987, they got married. Bridget was 18 and Michael was 27. This age difference between the two was not well regarded by society in Ireland at the time. This was considered a scandal and a reason for much gossip. A few years later, she returned to her hometown to take care of her mother, who was very ill. Her husband, on the other hand, stayed in Clonmel for work and visited Bridget on weekends. This kind of relationship, unusual for the time, was the cause of even more gossip. One was that Bridget was having an affair with a longtime neighbor named William Simpson, who was 24 years old. The age difference between the couple seemed to be the determining factor for the gossip to arise, but apparently the couple was unfazed by it. During this period that the couple only saw each other on the weekends, Bridget became more independent. She owned several chickens, and she would sell the eggs to neighbors and other nearby residents. This would guarantee that she would support for herself whenever her husband wasn't around. Something very unusual for the time, and even more for the place where she lived. After a while, Bridget managed to save some money to buy a Singer sewing machine. It was a very modern and advanced machine for its time. With this machine, she started to make different types of clothes and gradually conquered several clients in the surroundings. In 1891, Bridget's mother died, and she decided to continue living with her father, not to leave him alone, as he was already old and his brother had all married and no longer lived with them. Michael then decided to move in with Bridget for good to be closer to her and help her with her father. A few months later, Bridget's father was given a new house by the government as part of a program to improve the housing of rural workers. Many of the workers who were also given these houses were very happy with them. However, the location was not at all pleasing. Several of these houses were built next to the famous fairy forts, buildings from the ancient Celtic civilization that date back over 3,000 years. These forts were built by the Druids as a place of meetings, rituals, and human sacrifices. Over time, the population began to associate the forts with supernatural creatures from local folklore, such as goblins and fairies. They also had the belief that if anyone approached this place, they would cause the wrath of these creatures, and they would take revenge. Bridget and Michael were very happy in their new home. She made good income selling eggs and making clothes for all of the nearby neighbors. Michael was also making good money as a cooper. They were very happy and had a very stable financial life. Despite this happiness and financial stability, the two did not have children despite several years of marriage. This fact was also a source of gossip. On March 4, 1895, Bridget went to deliver eggs to Jack Dunn, a cousin of her father who lived near one of the fairy forts. Having a higher level of education due to the teaching she received at their college, she was not superstitious like the other people who lived there. Unlike them, she saw these creatures as just part of folklore and nothing more. She also had a fascination from an early age with stories about them, and it is said that she used to sit or walk in these forts. The road Bridget had to take to get to her father's cousin's house was a long one. There was about 10 kilometers round trip, and that day it was very cold. When she returned home, she couldn't get warm and ended up in bed, complaining of a fever and a hell of a headache. She told her husband and father that it was just the flu. However, as the week progressed, it only got worse. A few days later, her desperate father walked about 4 miles through a thunderstorm to beg a doctor to examine his daughter. The doctor said he could only go 4 days later because he was busy with other appointments. When the doctor went to examine Bridget, he found out she had bronchitis and prescribed some medication. Even with the diagnosis of a professional, Michael and his father-in-law were not convinced. They thought there was something else. They then decided to call Jack June, Bridget's father's cousin, the same one she delivered eggs 2 days earlier. He was known to know the mystical arts, a kind of wizard. As soon as Jack saw Bridget, who was pale and thin from her illness, he said that wasn't her. In conversation with Michael, he said that it was a changeling. In Irish folklore, changeling is a human copy of a fairy, having kidnapped the person and stolen their appearance. According to the legend, this usually happens to newborn children, when the creature enters the house and exchanges the child for a copy when the parents are asleep or distracted. With adults, this happens when someone enters or is attracted to the fairy forts where they are enslaved and the copy takes over their life. Bridget's husband then deduced that she was kidnapped while bringing eggs to Jack, as he lived near the fairy forts. He began to believe this so much that he began to spread the word that it wasn't his wife in bed, that he was 5 centimeters taller and had abnormal behavior. What's worse is that some people who lived nearby also began to believe, including some of Bridget's relatives. Michael then went to a man named Dennis Gunny, a kind of healer who was known for his experience in cases of changelings and fairy attacks. He prescribed a potion, saying he would drive the creature out and Michael's wife would return. Michael and some of Bridget's relatives held her down and forced her to drink the potion. Bridget was too weak to drink and ended up spitting out most of the liquid. Michael was angered by the supposed creature who had taken his wife's place, and along with her cousin, they began a bizarre ritual of cursing and assaulting. They dumped urine on her as part of this ritual. Michael shook her and yelled, "You're Bridget Boland, wife of Michael's Cleary, in God's name." Without strange, Bridget did not respond. They then lifted her up and dragged her woman to the fireplace, bringing her face close to the flames, for according to legends, changelings are afraid of fire. It is reported that neighbors heard screams and other noises coming from the house. However, out of fear, they did not intervene. The next day, Michael and Bridget's relatives called a priest and a doctor to see her. The two said that she was doing better and would soon recover, despite the physical damage caused by the expulsion ritual. As the days went by, Bridget had really improved. However, Michael was still not convinced. He thought the creature was there and wanted to deceive him. He then went to Bridget and started asking numerous questions to find out if it was really her. Bridget ended up getting annoyed, so an argument broke out. Michael felt affronted and was furious. He started hitting her and then threw her to the ground. Then, he took the poker and burned Bridget's mouth as he yelled at her to give it back to his wife. Not satisfied, he took oil from a lamp and threw it all over his wife's body, setting fire on it. Bridget was burned to death, and Michael kept screaming that it was not his wife. There were several of Bridget's relatives in the house, including her father, and no one intervened. They just watched. With Bridget dead, Michael asked a cousin of hers to help hiding the body. They took the body to a place of dense and remote forest. The next day, Michael went to the church to confess with the priest, where he told everything he had done claiming that he killed the changeling to get his wife back. The priest, horrified by the story, decided to inform the police the next day. When the police went after Michael, they found him near a fairy forest shouting his wife's name. After a brief conversation, Michael led to the officers to Bridget's body, which was naked and with a bag over her head. In total, 9 people, including Michael, were indicted for the crime. Of the 9, 7 people, including Bridget's father, were sentenced to forced labor, with sentences ranging from 6 months to 5 years. Mary Kennedy, who was Bridget's aunt, was in the house when it all happened, was acquitted of her conviction due to her old age and fragile health. Michael Cleary, Bridget's husband, took the longest sentence among the defendants. He was found guilty of manslaughter, but there is no intention to kill, and sentenced to 25 years in prison and penal servitude. On April 28, 1910, he was released after serving 15 years of his sentence, and in July of the same year, he migrated to Canada. This crime was widely reported by the media, both in Ireland and around the world. The bizarreness of the events that culminated in Bridget's death was much talked about at the time, even more so because many people in Ireland still believed in supernatural creatures from their folklore. Psychiatrists who reviewed the case said Michael could have developed Capgras syndrome, which is when an individual believes a person close to him or her has been replaced by an identical imposter. Therefore, whoever develops the syndrome may end up hurting a loved one or alienating them. Well, folks, that's it. Thank you so much for watching me this far, and I'll see you next time.